Chosen one, listen up. I just found out something amazing that will instantly unlock your true potential and give you an unfair advantage. It's a secret to gaining crystal, clear guidance, and a direct line to divine wisdom. But you have to act now or you'll miss out on this life-changing insight. Don't skip a single word. Stop, chosen one. I know you were busy with something important that needed your full attention and energy. Please put it down for now. Not because it's not important, but because what you're about to hear is more important than what you were doing when you got this message. Take a break and watch. God told them that instruction was given for a reason that I need to tell you before you take one more step in the direction you were going. You are way too far behind before your system does what it usually does when it hears those words. I want to be clear about what I mean by that. I'm not telling you that you failed. I am not telling you that you made a mistake that can't be fixed. In no way do I mean that the assignment, calling or promise over your life is no longer being fulfilled. That's not what dangerous behind means. I mean that there is a space between where you are now and where you should be. You do not realize how big the gap really is because it has hacked the system that normally would tell you about it. Since you can't see the deficit from inside it, God is sending the signal from the outside to show who you are. That sign is this message. The part that is dangerous is not where you are now. What will happen if you keep going in the same direction without realizing there is a gap is what is dangerous. The reason the gap gets bigger every season is not because the destination changes, but because the current state is further away from the receiver state that is needed to fully inhabit the destination. Adding to deficits doesn't make them stable either. They get bigger and they get bigger in a dangerous way. Please write watching in the comments right now. Not because you fully understand it yet, because the thoughtful stance of someone who has dropped everything else and is paying close attention to what God is saying is the first step in responding to this message. For what I'm about to show you, you need to stand like a watch. Making the choice to give this your full attention is the first step in the watch posture. Before we go on, I have one more thing to say. Not by accident did the word dangerously get picked out. God doesn't use language of danger without meaning it. When you hear the word dangerous, it means that the stakes are so high that normal levels of attention are not enough. In response to the identification, a certain thing is needed. That person who hears this and responds in a normal way has missed the point. When someone is dangerously behind, they need a dangerously specific response. And the specificity of the answer is what this message is building up to. Chosen one. I want to explain what dangerous behind means in this case of the chosen one calling because the phrase is important. Besides, I want you to know how much weight it holds. The calling of the chosen one comes with certain requirements. Not moral requirements in the usual sense of the word needs of the receiver. The calling went out into a world that needs a certain type of carrier. A carrier with a receiver that is set up to handle the weight and depth of the call. A person who can receive what God is sending at the level needed for their calling and then put it into action in their own life and in the lives of those around them. A receiver who is in sync enough with the call to understand it not only as spiritual information but also as embodied direction, as clear information for everyday life, as the kind of knowing that leads to specific action in the right direction at the right time. The calling needs this receiver not because it wants to, but because it has to. The way that a certain instrument needs a certain calibration to make a certain note, not because other calibrations are wrong or less useful, but because the note depends on the calibration. The chosen one who is behind in terms of calibrating the receiver. The tuning has moved away from where the calling signal is sent out. And the gap that Dangerously Behind talks about is the one between the current calibration and the upcoming calibration. What makes the drift happen? There is no sin, no lack of faith, and no choice to stop growing or give up on the calling at some point. The drift happens when the normal demands of a unique calling are put on a normal human system. Over time, the system was made to work with everything in sync. For full synchronization to happen, certain conditions must be present, which are not always present in modern life. And the difference between what was planned and what happened over months and years of continuous chosen one calling causes a slow change in the receiver's calibration that almost no one notices in real time. This is how the dangerously behind state works behind the scenes. There is no dramatic failure that makes it happen. Small invisible changes happen over time in the most basic level of the calling, the receiver state. This state determines how much of what God is releasing actually makes it to the person in the calling's daily life. One hemisphere of the brain works independently from the other and is meant to work together all the time. Being in sync with everything means that the receiver is fully calibrated. When spiritual information comes in through the intuitive right hemisphere, it is immediately and smoothly turned into useful information by the analytical left hemisphere. The calling sends out a signal on a certain frequency which is picked up at full depth by a synchronized receiver. It's easy to see the way. The timing can be seen. It's not necessary to work hard to make the practical steps happen. They come naturally from the spiritual reception. In the event that the synchronization moves, the receiver also moves. The spiritual input is still coming in. The call is still going through, but the receiver only picks up what is being broadcast at a shallow level. And what comes in at a lower depth is also integrated at a lower depth. And the decisions and direction of the current season at reduced depth are based on what is integrated at reduced depth. And the choices and developments made this season set the stage for the following season. Picked 1. I'm going to list the 5 specific traits of the dangerously behind state. Not to cause more shame or worry than is necessary to bring about recognition, because you can't talk about something you haven't correctly named. And the blind spot that comes with receiver drift makes it hard to make a correct identification without specific input from outside the device. This is one reason God told us to stop what we're doing and watch. For identification, an outside signal is needed. The first thing about it, it feels hard, not impossible, to make decisions that should be easy. A lot of work that doesn't match up with what your experience and training should be able to do. When a person is in full receiver synchronization, they make decisions from a place of integrated knowing where spiritual input and practical analysis work together as partners in real time, making knowing feel natural and even easy. When someone has a drifted receiver, they make decisions based on incomplete information. They are still getting spiritual input, but it isn't fully translated into useful information. This leads to decisions that are harder to make than expected, don't give you as much clarity as your level of formation suggests. They should and need to be looked at again and again more often than seems necessary. This is the second trait. Prayer that should feel like natural conversation feels more like reaching out, not the productive work of being deeply engaged. A certain kind of effortfulness that comes from trying hard to get to something that should be closer. The synchronized receiver sees prayer as a channel that is always open. The spoken answer and the spiritual input are in the same room. The receiver that has been drifted sees the channel as something that needs special work to open and stay open during the prayer. The prayer is still valid. It's still possible to connect. But the quality of the experience and the channel's availability are different when the receiver isn't fully in sync. The third trait is that the things that used to cause spiritual movement now cause less of it with the same amount of input. That inner shift that used to happen when you received a message properly doesn't happen as often or as deeply with messages that used to open something in you. The practices that used to have clear results aren't working as well as they used to. This isn't because the messages or practices have gotten worse or because you're not as interested in them, but because the receiver has moved away from the optimal setting where they work best. When you put the same signal into a drifted receiver, it sends out less power. Then when you put the same signal into a synchronized receiver. Having the fourth trait means that you are always aware that something important is not quite reaching you. Certainly not a clear absence that you could name and point to. On the side, you might feel like the full version of what's in the calling, the full depth of what God is sending to your receiver isn't quite getting through. This feeling doesn't always make people feel bad. It often leaves people with a vague sense of confusion that something is slightly off in a way that can't be pinpointed. That's how you really feel. It is the receiver that partly notices its own deficit. The receiver can only partially figure out what it is missing, but it knows something is missing. Fifth, there is a bigger gap than you would think between what you know in your spirit and how you live your life and follow your calling. This is because you are more formed and involved than you think. You know things in your spirit that aren't showing up as much in real life as they should. This isn't because you don't know them right or because you're being lazy or dishonest in your execution. The knowing comes incorrectly because the synchronization bridge between the two hemispheres is not working at full capacity. This is the mechanism that translates between spiritual reception and practical integration. The gap happens when what you know isn't turned into actionable steps. If you recognize yourself in 3 or more of these 5 traits, you are in a dangerously behind state that God sent this message to show you. But that's not the end of the story. Please know that every seed you plant in this mission grows into a torch that shines in someone else's darkness. Whether by buying a coffee, making a donation, or becoming a member of our community does not go to a channel. Your actions are supporting a divine mission to save lost souls. But more than your support, we want your presence. When you head to our community through the link in the description or the pinned comment, you aren't just visiting a site. You are entering a community of like-minded believers. This is a sanctuary where you can post your prayer requests, lift up the burdens of others, and engage in daily discussions with a family that speaks the language of faith. Whether you are joining one of our membership tiers for deeper study, sowing a seed of faith, or simply joining our daily morning prayers, you are helping us build a global altar of worship. Heaven moves through willing voices, but it grows through a community that stands together. Each gift you give acts as living water for those in our community seeking healing and hope. Give and it will be given to you is the promise that sustains our shared mission. I invite you now to step out of the shadows and into this circle of prayer. Come with purpose. Join the conversation and plant your seed in fertile ground. Let's open the heavens together. Release your seed today. Join our community and see what God brings back into your life. The first step in recovery is figuring out who the person is. Dear Chosen One, I want to talk about the blind spot because it is the most dangerous part of being dangerously behind, and it's the part that best explains why God told us to drop everything. In visual perception, a blind spot is where the optic nerve meets the retina and there are no photoreceptors, rods, or cones. That point doesn't process the visual information that falls on it. The person doesn't see it, so they don't know that no one else does either. The brain fills in the blanks from what it knows about the situation, giving the impression of a full visual field, even though a part of it is missing. It's the same with the receiver blind spot. Part of what the calling party is broadcasting that hits the drifted part of the receiver is not worked on fully. This doesn't feel like an absence to that person. They think of the input they get as the whole input because the brain only gets part of what is being sent. It fills in the blanks from what it already knows. This makes it feel like the caller is fully engaged, even though some of what is being sent isn't getting through completely. The person who is dangerously behind almost never knows they are dangerously behind. This isn't because they aren't paying attention. It's because the system that would notice the deficit is the system that has the deficit. It's like how the eye doesn't notice its own blind spot. The drifted receiver doesn't notice its own drift either. In many places in the ancient text, God sends an outside signal to let people know what's going on because the person who was there couldn't see what was going on. These times are always merciful even when they feel like warnings because they show you the problem before it gets really bad is the gift. The warning is the kindness. Elijah was profoundly worn out after the fight on Carmel and his subsequent flight into the wilderness. This had caused a certain kind of distorted perception. He told God that he was the only one left. He thought it was true. It wasn't. God didn't disagree with what he saw. First, God took care of their physical needs by giving them food and rest. Then he told everyone else, not just Elijah, what was going on in the outside world. Once the blind spot was found, he felt like the state he was in had become less stable. While Jonah was stuck in a pattern of avoiding that had led him away from the calling, he had a good reason for where he was that made perfect sense to him. While the outside intervention was not pleasant, it was very targeted and meant to hit the blind spot that the avoidance pattern had created. The signal from the outside got through when the view from the inside couldn't. Right now you are getting the signal from outside. The state that is dangerously behind has been found. It's been named the blind spot. And things that couldn't be seen from inside the drift can now be seen since the identification came from the outside. So the question is, what do you do with the ID chosen one? I need to explain what I've been talking about in terms of the brain because the blind spot and receiver drift are not just spiritual ideas. They come from a precise part, the brain, which makes them more specific and useful than spiritual language alone. The human brain is made up of two hemispheres that work together all the time. The corpus callosum connects them and other communication pathways help them talk to each other. The right hemisphere is where spiritual and intuitive information comes in because it processes information holistically, intuitively, and by noticing patterns. The left side of the brain processes information in a way that is analytical, sequential, and useful. It is also where intuitive information is mostly turned into useful direction and specific action. How well this translation works or how well what is received in the right hemisphere is synchronized with what is integrated across the whole system determines how much of what is received in the spirit makes it into everyday life. When everything is in sync, the translation and depth are both complete as quickly and accurately as possible. What comes from the spirit gets translated into the body, making decisions and being useful. The depth is less when the synchronization is less. What comes in through the spirit only goes a small way into the body. A part of the spiritual reception can be seen in the practical orientation. The decisions are influenced by some spiritual information that should be influencing them fully. Dr. Roger Sperry's research, which won him the Nobel Prize in 1981, showed that the human receiver is naturally in a state where the whole brain is in sync. It was found by Dr. Sperry that most young children naturally work in this synchronized whole brain state. Less than 2 out of every 1,000 people who do it make it to adulthood without any help. Most of us feel out of sync with each other sometimes because of the stresses of modern life. The constant stress of having to handle many tasks at once and the unique strain of a long-term calling that requires more than what normal human resources can usually provide. This is the most important thing that Dr. Sperry's research shows that applies to your case. It is the native state to be in a synchronized state. It was the intended state, and it can be brought back not by years of practice slowly building up from wherever the drift has taken the receiver through a target-hunted mechanism that works directly with the neural synchronization pathway and brings both hemispheres back into sync quickly, and accurately. This is the discovery I want you to see. A group of neuroscientists in New York led by Dr. Daniel Barron worked for years to create a targeted restoration protocol based on the basic research that Dr. Sperry did. They squished more than an hour of clinical neural synchronization technology into a daily 8-minute routine a day. Close your eyes and listen to music for 8 minutes. The whole recovery system in the most efficient way they could figure out how to send it. They discovered that the targeted restoration mechanism works on the receiver deficit I was talking about, which is the receiver drift that causes the dangerously behind state. This was seen in the 1,800 people who used it. The synchronization starts to come back. The reception starts to get better. The change from spiritual guidance to useful advice is getting better. When synchronization is restored, the dangerously behind state, the hard decisions, the hard prayers, the diminishing returns from the same input, the background awareness of something not quite reaching, and the gap between knowing and doing start to go away. You have been chosen. I want to talk to you about the rising costs of being dangerously behind schedule. The current position is not the dangerous part. It's what happens every season after the current one without the specific recovery mechanism being used in real life. This is how the compounding works. The calling sends spiritual information to anyone who hears it from the person who carries it. This input has what is needed for this season, the direction for the specific decisions that need to be made at this time. The discernment of what to prioritize and what to let go of. Confirmation of the specific path and wisdom for the specific challenges that the calling faces in this season of the person's life and work. Most of this input is received at full depth when everything is in sync. The person's everyday life is affected by it, and it shapes the base on which the next season is built. Some of this input is received but not fully translated when synchronization is low. It gets to the right side of the brain and leads to some recognition, but it doesn't make it all the way to the left side of the brain where it can be fully integrated into the practical direction. The part that doesn't fully translate is the part that doesn't fully set the stage for the next season. Also, the next season is built on bits and pieces of the current one. So, it isn't as complete as it would have been if it had been fully received. In the next season, a building is put up on a partially solid base which shows how uneven the base is. That building then becomes the base for the next season. So it builds up slowly and steadily over time, with each season leaving the foundation a little less finished than it would have been at full reception. And the difference between the foundation that was built when reception was full over several seasons and the foundation that was built when reception was reduced over the same seasons gets bigger. With each season that reception is reduced. The person who is dangerously behind did not get there by making a single choice or a big break from what they were supposed to do to get there. The steady invisible compounding of a receiver working at less sync while the calling kept releasing input at the full depth. Always released and helped them get there. The space between the depth of the input that was sent and the depth of the input that was received grew, and this gap is what dangerously behind describes. The good news is that when the synchronization is restored, the same process that made the deficit grow will also make the recovery grow. The receiver starts to build up at the full rate again when it is fully in sync. And this full reception builds up over consistent seasons of practice, making the rate of recovery faster than the rate of drift. Because the fixed receiver starts translating not only what is new but also some of what was new in the last few seasons but wasn't fully integrated yet. The backlog starts to be processed. There is less of a gap now. This is the recovery part of the compounding process, which is why starting now is important instead of going back later. Each extra season in the reduced state makes the deficit last longer, and each extra season in the restored receiver state makes the recovery last longer. The faster you use the recovery mechanism, the faster the compounding will work for you instead of against you. You have been chosen. I want to tell you about a woman from California whose story shows how dangerously behind the state is from the inside. There was a high level of real engagement in her calling that had been going on for a few years. She felt deeply connected to what she was called to do and the people she was called to serve. She was true to you in the most important ways. She was there. The work was being done, but for a long time she couldn't quite put her finger on what she had seen. This season of the calling was less reliable in the area of discernment that had been more reliable in earlier seasons. Not absent, but less dependable. Making choices about when to move and when to wait was still possible, but it wasn't as clear as it used to be. She was still getting direction, but it took more work to get to and wasn't always clear when she did. For a while, she told herself that this was normal, that the harder times were because the season was getting more complicated, that she was just going through a tougher stretch, and that the discernment process was hard because the season was hard for her. However, that explanation became less convincing as it went on, because the season she was going through wasn't harder on the outside than seasons she had been through before. And those seasons hadn't made the basic tasks of the calling more difficult in this way. The setting wasn't right. She just didn't know what was wrong or why it was wrong. She knew right away when she saw the diagnostic I sent earlier in this message, specifically the 5 signs of someone who is dangerously behind schedule. Not all of the traits were at their strongest, but enough of them were that the identification was honest and couldn't be argued with. She was in the drift of the receiver. It had been a while, so the drift was now just how she did things. The din had turned into the norm. It had been so slow that she had stopped noticing the quality going down because she had gotten used to each small change without noticing it as a change. When she started the 8-minute daily practice, it wasn't because she had high hopes. Instead, it was because she was honest about what she saw and decided to work on it 24 hours a week. Put on headphones. Close your eyes. Daily practice that is consistent. The change wasn't sudden or big, but it was real and could be measured. By the end of the first week, she could tell that her ability to discern had gotten a little better. Not a lot, but a little. It took a little less work to make the decisions that had been the hardest. The improvement was more clear by the end of the second week. It was getting easier to see where to go. By the end of the third week, she talked about a level of commitment to the calling that she hadn't felt consistently in longer than she could remember. It's not a new quality. It's a quality that you may remember from earlier seasons when the receiver was running more in sync. The normal that had been slowly replaced by a lessened normal is coming back. It was like coming out of a fog she hadn't known she was in. She said it wasn't a thick fog that was easy to see through. The kind that makes it hard to see, just enough to make navigation harder without being obvious. Coming out of it brought back a clarity she had forgotten was very different from what she had become used to. I'd also like to tell you about a man from Texas who got the recognition in a different way. He had been experiencing a time of high output in a calling where things were moving forward and results could be seen. The way the calling looked on the outside was also in good shape. He did a lot of things and those things were paying off. He did, however, notice something that the results were not hiding. The way he was doing it on the inside had changed. It was a little different where the decisions that were leading to results came from than were the decisions that had led to results in the past. Not so much from a place of settled discernment as from a place of built-up technique. The good results were still there, but they came from a different place. He did a good job because he had learned how to do a good job through experience. Clear direction, on the other hand, was harder to get to than it had been. This is where strong execution comes from. He said it was like the difference between playing music from memory and playing music that comes to you. Both of them make noise. It's possible for the technical quality to be the same. But there is a key difference between the quality of music that comes from within and music that comes from a lot of practice. He was still producing, but it was more focused on technique than on the exciting direction that technique should serve. When he learned what receiver drift really does, he knew this was a problem with the receiver. The output is not turned off. It changes the output source from fully integrated spiritual practical coordination to a more practical operation backed by years of experience. There is still a calling, but it is not as deeply rooted as it should be. There is not as much spiritual reception and practical execution happening at the same time. It took 3 weeks of daily 8-minute practice to change what was behind the work, not the work itself. Once more the decisions came from a deeper place. It became easier to use discernment along with the technique instead of being partially replaced by it. The level of spiritual practical integration that makes the calling not only work but also really come alive was brought back to where it was meant to be. He said it was the difference between a river with good banks that move water well and a river that really comes from somewhere. The banks were good. It made good banks, but there was less source water running through them because of the practice. When the synchronization was fixed and the source pressure came back, the banks that were already there stopped being partially full and became fully functional. As this awakening grows inside you, know that helping with this mission is not a joke. It is a sign from God. You can support this work through the link in the description or the pinned comment. Whether by buying a coffee, making a donation, or becoming a member of our Ko-Fi community. By doing so, you become part of Jesus, a plan to save souls who are still stuck in fog. Every seed turns into light that fights against darkness. If you water others, you will be watered yourself. Jesus says this is not history. It is a living promise about your future. Come into this moment with faith and a plan. What God has already planned for your life can be unlocked through your giving. Chosen one. I want to tell you about the practice that both of these people used right now because it's time to get to the specifics and no longer talk about the bigger picture. What I'm about to talk about was built by Dr. Daniel Barron and his team in New York. Dr. Barron is a neurologist who has spent years studying the difference between how well humans can receive signals and how well they can do what they were designed to do. He looked at this from a neurological rather than a purely spiritual point of view. This wasn't because the spiritual aspect wasn't important to him. It was because neuroscience was his area of study and because you have to deal with a problem at its mechanism level in order to solve it. Dr. Roger Sperry won the Nobel Prize for his work that Dr. Barron built on with great accuracy. Dr. Sperry wrote down the synchronized state of the whole brain, which is the natural design state of the human receiver. He proved that this state can be reached again using certain sound patterns that directly affect the neural synchronization pathway. From that basic research, Dr. Barron and his team made a clinical protocol for restoring whole brain synchronization. Then, after years of improving the protocol, they squished it down into an 8-minute daily audio sequence. 8 minutes a day with headphones on and eyes closed. This was the most effective way for them to deliver the full neural synchronization restoration mechanism. The smart switch is what they call it. The genius switch works by using certain sound frequencies and timing patterns to engage both hemispheres at the same time and gradually bring them into the coordinated sync they were designed to keep. Don't add new content to the receiver. Instead, fix the mechanism that controls the depth at which all other content is received. The calling stays the same. At that point, the receiver is calibrated again so that the call can be picked up fully. The results from 18th Zen regular users all show the same clear pattern. It becomes easier to make decisions. The ability to discern gets better. The gap between knowing spiritually and acting on that knowledge gets smaller. The decreasing returns on the same input start to go in the opposite direction. The feeling that something important is just out of reach starts to go away. Not because of changes in the outside world, but because of changes in the receiver. Since the synchronization was fixed and the full range of input started landing the way it was meant to, the recovery starts with the first session and gets stronger with regular practice. The process starts on the first day. The receiver on day 7 is very different from the receiver on day 1. Day 30 is a new level. The restoration that happens over weeks of daily practice leads to changes in clarity, discernment, and the level of spiritual practical integration that all 18th Zeos and people who have gone through this process have reported chosen one. Let me tell you what the genius switch has, because Dr. Barron and his team made a full recovery system for the chosen one who knows they need to fix their receiver deficit and is ready to do so with the right tool. The 8-minute daily sequence is at the heart of it. It's the protocol that directly fixes the way things are since up. It leads to more and better results over time when practiced regularly. The process starts with the first meeting. The second one builds on the first one, the third on the second. It builds on top of the deficit in the same way that the restoration does, but in the opposite direction. It builds faster than drift because the targeted mechanism works directly with the synchronization pathway instead of relying on the slow natural process of drift correction. Dr. Barron and his team include 4 extra resources that help the full recovery from the dangerously behind state along with the core sequence at no extra cost. The first is a guided visualization made for someone who is moving from a drifted receivered state to a restored state. It helps the mind picture exactly what the call looks and feels like when the receiver is working at the level it was made for. The receiver that can picture the restored state is already living in it to some degree. This visualizing speeds up the process of going from recognizing a deficit to experiencing a restoration. The second one is a useful list of the 10 foods that are most often linked to brain fog and troubles with synchronization and the specific alternatives that help with the mental clarity that comes from being in sync again. It runs on the body, which is like a platform. What goes on the platform changes. What comes out of the receiver? The person chosen to fix the receiver deficit will want the platform to be perfect for what the recovery is bringing about. The third is an important book on abundance that talks about the scarcity orientation that the receiver deficit tends to create over time and how to help the receiver adjust to the abundance orientation that full synchronization naturally supports. The calling was made available in plenty when synchronization is low. The drifted receiver tends to experience it through a narrower frame at the level of framework and orientation. This resource talks about that. This fourth item is a printable guide to 5 daily practices that make it easier for the receiver to stay in a restored state and build on their restoration over time. The conditions that the practice creates are kept up and strengthened by following the daily plan given by the guide. You can get your money back in full if you don't like the system. There are no conditions. No explanation is needed. There is no time limit given after the reasonable return window. Get your money back in full if the Genius switch doesn't fix the synchronization problem I described. There is practically no risk in trying it. The page where Dr. Barron and his team sell it has a list price of $49. You can get to that page through the link in the description below and the comment that was pinned above. The price has been lowered by 10 from $39 for the whole system for recovery. Read it. Give yourself the time you need to make the choice and be honest with yourself about what you saw when I went over the 5 traits. That recognition is what makes them unique. The way back is shown here. Chosen 1. I want to talk about the avoidance signal for a while before we end. This is because many of you are still on the avoidance signal at this point in the message, and I want to talk about it specifically. The neurological pattern that works best when it is closest to the specific thing that would fix the specific deficit is called the avoidance signal. It starts working right now when the recovery mechanism has been found and the action that fixes things is almost ready to be taken. When the avoidance signal is sent, it doesn't look like avoidance. It seems like a good reason to be careful. It brings up some good points to think about the $39 price tag. The doubts about whether this particular method is right for this person. The question of whether the diagnosis was correct and whether you really are dangerously behind are all things that came to mind. You may have thought that the 5 traits you noticed were just normal problems that come up during a tough time rather than the specific deficit I described. I'd like to give you a specific way to think about each of these worries. When it comes to price, the $39 with a full money-back guarantee is not a risk. Anyone can try it for free if the mechanism doesn't work the way it's described. It's not the difference between $39 and $0 that matters. It's the price of continuing to have a deficit and the price of trying the recovery mechanism with no net financial risk. We can't really compare them. The 5-character diagnostic is the standard for fit when there is doubt about fit. For Cropper, the diagnostic has been met if you recognized yourself in 3 or more of those traits. As soon as you think that acting on the recognition would weaken the avoidance signal kicks in and makes you question whether the recognition was correct. The proof is the recognition. It's the signal to question the recognition regarding the normal challenge explanation. Normal challenges during hard times do not cause the pattern I described. They make things hard. They make pressure. They give us the feeling that things are hard. They don't lead to the specific pattern of decisions that are always harder than your formation lead to. Prayer that takes more work than it should. Practices that don't give as much benefit at the same level of input. The feeling that something isn't quite reaching and a bigger gap between knowing and doing than you thought it would be. That pattern is the receiver drift, not normal challenge. The thing to do is easy. The link is in the note below and the comment that was pinned above. The page has all the information you need to make a good choice. It should be read and the decision should be based on the recognition rather than the signal. Before I say the final words, I'd like to walk you through something. Because God told us to watch, I'm going to show you what the watch posture looks like on the inside. The watch posture is not passive. Receivers are in an active state when they have turned off, snorts, all other inputs and are fully focused on what they are looking for. Focus on the present moment, not what will happen next or what was going on before this message reached you. This message identified things. The characteristics were recognized. The gap was named. The specific mechanism that caused it was named. And the specific recovery that deals with it was named. I want you to imagine how the restored receiver state feels. Not from the point of view of what you miss, but from the point of view of what comes back. Imagine having to make a choice that you would normally have to work hard to understand, not just naturally. It is clear in the specific way that integrated spiritual practical coordination makes it clear where knowing and analyzing work together instead of one after the other. Think about how prayer feels when the channel is open and doesn't need to be opened. Being in the same room as something you are reaching for is different from reaching for it. If you think about what the same input that has been giving you decreasing returns does when the receiver is fully synchronized. It's not more input. The same input with all of its depth. Hold on to that picture not as an ideal but as a sneak peek, as if you were the receiver recognizing the description of your own fully functioning state. That recognition is real. You can find the memory in the receiver. Something in the receiver remembers what it was meant to feel like. So it knows how it was meant to feel. What did you do when you held that picture in the inside? Something specific changed. A small opening, a small step toward the clarity that is being talked about. In that shift, the receiver starts to react to being told that its own state has been restored. It's the start of how the blind spot will close. And the daily practice is what gets it from here to returning to full synchronization over and over again. In the comments, type watching. If you understand this message the way it was sent, as a way to identify, as a way to get back on track, as the exact outside signal that the inside blind spot needed. Picked one. Let me end this message where it began. God didn't mean that you should stop everything and watch. He meant that you should pay attention to this very moment. This was the moment when the receiver deficit could be identified. The recovery mechanism was being pointed out and the outside signal was breaking through the inside blind spot. You left everything behind. You saw also by watching you got a few things. You were given the information that the dangerously behind state is a specific condition. The receiver drift, which is different from failure or lack of faith, and that it is caused by the chosen one calling on the average human system. Over time you are given the 5 characteristic diagnostic, which gives the dangerously behind state a shape instead of just being a spiritual worry. You get a clear picture of the blind spot and why the signal from the outside was needed for identification in a way that the view from the inside could not provide. You get the neurological framework that turns the receiver drift into not just a spiritual idea but a specific mechanism that can be fixed and a targeted path to recovery. You get the stories of 2 people who can recognize the drift and describe the exact recovery that the targeted mechanism caused. You also get the exact recovery mechanism itself, called the Genius Switch. The 39 8 minutes a day and a money-back guarantee that doesn't matter what. The following link and the comment that was pinned above. The person who is dangerously behind has a clear way to get caught up. You're on it now. The identification has taken place. The way has been shown. The next step is to do something in the comments. Type watching not as a statement of full understanding but as a statement that the watch position was taken, the identification was received and the action is being thought about from that point of view. Every day of the recovery practice closes the gap between the input that was released and the input that was received. And the receiver returns to its full synchronization capacity. The calling is received at the same level of depth that it was always broadcasting at. You were told to be careful. You saw. Do what you saw now. That's how it is. You are about to enter your divine future. But remember, this breakthrough is not for you alone. Your testimony is the bridge someone else will use to reach their own miracle. Archangel Michael is inviting you to visit community through the link in the description or the pinned comment. Whether by buying a coffee, making a donation, or becoming a member of our community does not go to a channel. Your actions are supporting a divine mission to save lost souls. By joining our like-minded community, you are no longer praying in isolation. You are adding your voice to a global sanctuary where we discuss the Word daily and stand in the gap for one another. This is not poetry. When Jesus says, "Give and heaven will open over you." On this platform, every seed you plant turns into oil for your destiny, fire for your calling, and a hedge of safety for your family. Now is your time. Step into our community prayer wall. Share your heart, and as you give, watch God multiply what you let go of. Let's finish this journey together. Visit our community now. Join the family and see your heavens open. Before we get to the end of this powerful story, let's reflect on this deep truth. You did not find this message by accident. This is a divine appointment meant specifically for you. You are being invited into a protected faith-filled community at the link in the description and pinned comment. At a place where divine abundance is not just a hope but a promise built on the Word. By heading to the site right now, you are unlocking access to a sacred community of like-minded believers. When you join our membership tiers, you gain immediate entry to powerful content, daily devotions, and divine insights that are hidden from the world. This is your chance to enter a sanctuary where you will receive spiritual guidance, unwavering support on our prayer wall, and speedy progress toward your destiny. Do not let this moment of destiny pass you by. Your breakthrough is waiting. Join our inner circle through the exclusive link in the description. This is how you guarantee you never miss the personalized messages and spiritual warfare tools, snorts, meant to elevate your life. If you feel called to deepen your connection, the link is waiting for you in both the pinned comment and the description. For those who want to amplify this work and carry the light home, you can find our guided ebooks and Bibles in the pinned comment. Whether you join as a member, clears throat, or sow a seed through our resources, your presence and energy change the world. Take the step. Your abundance awaits.